Usually, when we think about a camera, we sort of expect this absolute objective precision. Like, you point the lens, you click the shutter, and boom.
Right. The resulting photograph is just a faithful one-to-one recording of reality.
Yeah, exactly. It's this clean, mechanical process.
Yeah.
And I think intuitively, we expect our eyes to work exactly the same way. You open them, and the world just pours in, unfiltered, exactly as it exists in the physical space.
It feels like a direct, unedited live feed, you know? We are just so culturally conditioned to believe that seeing is believing.
Oh, absolutely.
The whole subjective experience of vision is so seamless that we never really stop to question the actual mechanics of it.
But the moment you step into the world of neurology or like visual psychology, that comforting camera lens analogy is completely shattered.
Oh, totally destroyed.
Yeah, we are actually navigating a visual landscape that is honestly a highly curated illusion. What you think you see every single day, whether you're just walking down a crowded sidewalk or staring at your computer screen, it's largely a fabrication, constructed by your own brain.
It really muddies the waters of how we even define our own reality, right? What our eyes physically perceive is just raw data, and that is only the very beginning of the story.
Right.
By the time an image actually reaches your conscious awareness, it has been aggressively filtered, altered, and well interpreted.
So, welcome to a deep dive that might just fundamentally change how much you trust your own eyes. We're pulling our insights today from a really foundational source. It's called 100 Things Every Designer Needs to Know About People by Dr. Susan Weinschenk.
It's a great book. She basically synthesized decades of cognitive psychology and neurological research to explain human behavior, specifically through the lens of design.
And the overarching mission for this deep dive is to deconstruct those hidden visual shortcuts that the human brain takes just to survive.
Right. We want to really understand the biological mechanisms at play here.
And we're going to explore how designers use, and frankly sometimes abuse, these psychological quirks to direct your attention, to influence your behavior, and basically shape the digital and physical world you interact with every single day.
To do that, though, we really have to establish the biological baseline we're working with. Because vision is not a passive recording. It is a highly active, aggressively demanding editing process.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if my eyes are just a raw camera lens, my brain is basically the AI software aggressively photoshopping everything before I even consciously perceive it.
That analogy holds up beautifully, actually, mostly because of the sheer volume of data involved. I mean, your brain is receiving a staggering 40 million sensory inputs every single second.
40 million. That is insane.
Right. It cannot possibly process all of that consciously without completely overloading your system. So to cope with it, it relies on evolutionary rules of thumb.
Makes sense.
Think about the physical process of seeing. Light enters the eye, it hits the retina, and it creates a two-dimensional image. It is always a 2D projection, even when you're looking at a fully three-dimensional room.
So it's just a completely flat projection on the back of the eye.
Exactly. From there, that flat image is sent to the visual cortex in the back of your brain. And that is where the neurological heavy lifting happens. The visual cortex has to reconstruct that 2D image back into a 3D mental representation.
And how does it do that instantly?
Well, it splits the raw visual data into as many as 12 distinct processing tracks.
Like individual channels on an audio mixing board, right? All isolating different instruments.
Precisely. One track is dedicated entirely to processing shadows. Another isolates edges. You have a track that literally only fires when it detects lines tilted at exactly 40 degrees.
Wait, really? Just 40 degrees?
Yeah, it's that specific. Another one tracks color. But the brain doesn't treat all 12 of these tracks equally. It prioritizes the data based on survival.
Okay, so what gets priority?
It routes the most critical information, specifically movement and location, through this incredibly fast neural pathway called the dorsal stream. The processing for form and color, however, goes through a slightly slower pathway called the ventral stream.
So it basically isolates the where is it and is it moving toward me data first.
Yeah.
Because that is what keeps you alive.
Yeah.
And then it worries about the what colors the data a fraction of a second later.
Yes, exactly. And to save even more processing power, it will happily invent things that aren't actually there just to make the picture make sense quickly.
Right. The book talks about this.
Yeah, the source material highlights these classic optical illusions to prove the point. Take the Canonical triangle, for instance.
Oh, I've seen that one. It's just an image with 3 Pac-Man-like circles facing inward and a few angled lines, right?
Yep. But when you look at it, you clearly perceive a solid, bright, white triangle sitting on top of those shapes.
Even though there are no lines drawing a triangle on the page, it's literally just empty space.
Right. Your brain creates the shape, the borders, and even an illusion of brightness, because based on the arrangement of the other elements, a triangle should be there. Or consider the Miller-Lyer illusion. It's two parallel lines of identical length, but one has outward-pointing arrows at the ends, and the other has inward-pointing arrows.
And one looks way longer than the other.
Exactly. Your brain genuinely alters the perceived physical length of the objects because the arrows manipulate how your brain calculates depth and distance.
It's honestly a little unsettling to realize how much of our visual field is essentially just a low-res rendering our brain fills in with guesswork.
Very unsettling.
But we can actually exploit this biology if we know how it works, right? Like, we all learned about rods and cones in high school biology. Cones for color and bright light, rods for low light. But the source points out this functional hack based on how they're physically laid out in the eye.
Yeah, this is a great practical tip. You have about 7 million cones packed really tightly into the fovea, which is the very center of your vision. But your 125 million low-light sensitive rods, those are clustered outside the center in your periphery.
So if you're trying to find something in a dark room, looking directly at it is actually the worst thing you can do.
Yes.
Exactly, because you're focusing the image onto the cones, which are completely useless in the dark.
You actually have to look slightly away from the object to engage the rods in your peripheral vision, which honestly feels completely counterintuitive to everything we do during the day.
It does feel weird, but it perfectly transitions into just how much we underappreciate our peripheral vision in general. We tend to think of central vision as the star of the show. It's where we focus, right?
Yeah, of course.
But because the brain is obsessed with getting the gist of a situation quickly and efficiently, it actually relies far more on peripheral vision to understand the environment.
What's fascinating here is how they prove this, because Adam Larson and Lester Loschke ran a study to isolate exactly how much of a scene we grasp with central versus peripheral vision.
Right, the living room study.
Yeah. They showed subjects photographs of common environments, like a living room or a kitchen, for just a fraction of a second.
A completely subliminal flash. And they manipulated the images. In one set, they blacked out the entire outer edge of the photo, leaving only the center visible. In the other set, they blacked out the center like a donut hole, leaving only the peripheral details.
And the results of this completely changed how I think about walking into a room.
It's wild.
When the central part of the photo was missing the donut hole, when people could still perfectly identify that they were looking at a kitchen, but when only the center was visible and the periphery was blacked out, they had absolutely no idea what kind of room they were in.
That's because central vision is highly specialized for specific object recognition. You use it to, like, read the buttons on the microwave or inspect an apple, but peripheral vision is what tells your brain you are standing in a kitchen to begin with.
It's the context.
Exactly. And the evolutionary causality here is brilliant. Our ancestors survived because their central vision could focus entirely on the intricate work of, say, sharpening a flint tool, while their peripheral vision constantly monitored the broader savanna for threats.
Right. If your peripheral vision didn't give you the gist of the lion stalking through the grass, you didn't pass on your genes.
Exactly. And Dimitri Bale's research actually quantifies exactly how deep this survival mechanism goes neurologically. He monitored the amygdala, which is the brain's emotional fear center, to see how fast it reacts to fearful objects.
Okay.
When a threat is presented in central vision, it takes the amygdala between 140 and 190 milliseconds to fire.
But when that same threat is shown in the peripheral vision...
It triggers in just 80 milliseconds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, your brain's alarm system fires almost twice as fast when something concerning happens on the edge of your sight.
Which completely explains a modern annoyance, actually. Like when you are trying to read a dense article online and there's a blinking animated advertisement in the sidebar.
Oh, the absolute worst.
Right. But you physically cannot stop your eyes from darting over to look at it. Designers are actively weaponizing our evolutionary survival traits. The flashing ad is playing the role of the lion on the savanna, and our 80-millisecond amygdala response is basically forcing us to pay attention.
They're literally hacking your biology. So your peripheral vision instantly establishes the context of the where, but your central vision still has to rapidly identify the what. It has to recognize the specific objects in front of you.
Right. And if the brain is constantly cutting corners to save caloric energy, how does it recognize millions of different objects instantly? I mean, it can't possibly have a mental filing cabinet of every single item we've ever encountered, right?
No, it doesn't. Irving Biederman proposed the Geon theory of object recognition to explain this efficiency. He suggested that our brains don't store complete high-resolution models of everything.
So what does it do?
Instead, the visual system relies on a vocabulary of just 24 basic three-dimensional geometric shapes. He called them genes. We're talking about simple forms here, like cylinders, cones, blocks, wedges.
So G-Jones are basically visual Lego blocks. The brain looks at an object, breaks it down, snaps a cylinder and a curved tube together, and instantly registers coffee mug.
Yes, the visual cortex acts as a rapid assembly engine, building the physical world out of those 24 basic structural blocks.
But I want to push back on this a little, because if we only recognize 24 basic geometric shapes, how do I instantly tell the difference between my black coffee mug and my wife's blue one in a split second? The structural Lego blocks for both of those are identical.
That is where the parallel processing we mentioned earlier comes in. Remember the two streams?
The dorsal and ventral streams.
Exactly. The G-Jones form the immediate structural scaffold. They answer the question, what category of object is this? Simultaneously, that slower ventral stream is painting the surface characteristics onto the scaffold. The color, the texture, the specific text on the mug.
Okay, so you recognize the genes first to know it's a cup, and a fraction of a millisecond later, the color data tells you whose cup it is.
Exactly. The structure always comes first. And this reliance on structure leads to another really fascinating human quirk, the source covers, which is the canonical perspective.
Oh, this part was so interesting.
Right. So Stephen Palmer conducted research where he traveled globally and asked people from vastly different cultures to simply draw a coffee cup.
Just a standard cup.
Yeah. And almost universally, no one drew a perfect circle, which would be the view from directly above, and no one drew a perfectly flat rectangle with a handle sticking out, which is the view from perfectly straight on.
They all drew it from an angle slightly above and slightly offset to the side.
Yes. Palmer called this the canonical perspective, and it applies to almost everything. If you ask someone to draw a small dog, they will draw it from that slightly elevated offset angle, even though in reality a standing human almost always views a small dog from directly above, looking straight down.
So why does the brain default to this specific angle in our mental filing cabinet? Like, why that angle?
It comes right back to caloric efficiency. The canonical perspective is the specific viewing angle that exposes the maximum number of genes simultaneously.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if you look at a cup straight down, you only see a cylinder gene. You can't see the handle. By storing the mental model at an offset angle, the brain doesn't have to expend extra neurological energy performing like mental rotation to verify the object. It sees all the defining Lego blocks at once.
The brain is relentlessly lazy. And there's this mind-bending detail in the source about how these shapes function when we aren't even looking at anything. The visual cortex actually works harder, burning more energy when we imagine an object than when we are physically looking at it.
Yeah, because when an object is physically in front of you, the raw data is feeding directly through your retina. The physical stimulus is providing the fuel.
Right.
But when you close your eyes and imagine a coffee cup, the visual cortex has to fire up and generate those genes completely from scratch, using internal memory rather than external light. It requires significantly more neurological heavy lifting to basically construct a hallucination.
Okay, so the brain uses these basic geometric Lego blocks for almost everything to save time. A chair, a car, a dog. But the source notes there is one specific category of visual data that completely bypasses this entire gene assembly process.
Faces. In the visual hierarchy, faces are the ultimate VIPs. We have an entirely dedicated neural pathway just for them. It's centered around a region called the Fusiform face area, or the FFA. This was identified by a cognitive neuroscientist named Nancy Kamlischer.
So the FFA just skips the line entirely.
Exactly. When you look at a face, your visual cortex doesn't even bother assembling it from cylinders and wedges. The data gets an absolute fast track, bypassing standard object recognition and connecting directly to the emotional centers of the brain.
Which is why you can instantly spot a friend in a crowded stadium. We're practically hardwired for this from birth, aren't we? I mean, newborns show a strong preference for looking at faces within an hour of being born.
Yes, it's innate. And the necessity of the FFA becomes very clear when we look at neurodivergence. Karen Pierce conducted some incredible research showing that individuals with autism often do not use the FFA when viewing faces. Instead, their brains process faces using the standard, slower object recognition pathways.
How did that actually alter their lived experience of seeing a face?
Well, If a face is processed as an object rather than through the dedicated VIP track, it lacks that immediate, automatic emotional tagging. It requires a lot more conscious, analytical effort to decode the facial expression, which fundamentally changes how social interactions are perceived and prioritized.
It isn't just about recognizing specific people, is it? It is about the brain instantly calculating what is alive and what isn't.
Right. Christine Lucer and T. Wheatley designed a brilliant study around this exact concept. They took high-resolution photographs of real human faces and digitally morphed them, stage by stage, into inanimate plastic mannequins.
Super creepy.
Very. And then they asked subjects to pinpoint the exact frame where the image stopped looking alive.
So, finding the uncanny valley threshold.
Yes, and the threshold was remarkably consistent across all subjects. At about the 75% human mark, the brain categorically declares the image inanimate. And the crucial finding was actually how the brain makes this decision. People almost exclusively analyze the eyes.
The eyes.
Yeah, the eyes are the definitive data point the brain uses for human connection and determining agency.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me as a consumer. Because if we know that the brain prioritizes eyes above everything else, and eye tracking studies show that we naturally, almost involuntarily, follow the gaze of a face on a screen, web designers are absolutely using this to manipulate us.
Oh, it is a standard design tactic. Think about it. If a web page features a photograph of a person looking directly at the camera, your brain connects with them emotionally.
Sure.
But if that person's eyes are looking off to the side, directly pointing at, say, a subscribe or buy now button, your eyes will involuntarily follow their gaze. You will look at the button. It is a biological reflex that designers map out very deliberately to guide your attention.
So peripheral vision establishes the environment. Genes quickly identify the objects. The FFA processes the faces. But once the brain recognizes all these elements, how does it know what to actually do with the objects in front of us? Like, how does vision translate into action?
This brings us to one of the most important concepts in design psychology, affordances. James Gibson originally developed the theory, and then Don Norman adapted it into what we call perceived affordances. An affordance is basically the physical cue that an object broadcasts about how you should interact with it.
So an affordance is essentially a visual promise. The physical shape of the object promises you a specific physical action.
Yes. The classic example is a door handle. A door with a long, vertical, cylindrical handle is physically inviting your hand to wrap around it and pull.
Right.
It is practically screaming pull.
Right.
If you grab that handle, pull, and the door doesn't budge because the sign actually says push, you experience a massive cognitive disconnect.
Because the object broke its visual promise. It causes instant frustration, and you feel foolish, but it isn't actually a failure of your intelligence. It's a failure of design. I think we call them Norman doors now, right?
Yes, exactly. But the real challenge for modern designers is translating those physical affordances into the digital world. Think about a button on a website. How does your brain know it's a button you can press when it is displayed on a completely flat 2D glass screen?
Historically, they use subtle drop shadows, right? On the bottom and right edges of the graphic. That tiny fake shadow is a digital affordance. It's tricking the brain into perceiving depth, promising that the flat pixels can actually be pushed.
Precisely. But as the source points out, design trends are starting to strip these vital cues away, which causes absolute usability nightmares. The minimalist, flat design trend removes shadows entirely, leaving just colored squares that don't promise any interaction at all.
Oh, or look at what happened to hyperlinks. A link used to always be blue and underlined. That was a very clear, consistent affordance. Now, these sleek sites often hide the link, making it regular text that only changes color or underlines when you hover your mouse cursor over it.
Which is a complete failure of affordance if you are, say, reading an article on an iPad touchscreen. You cannot hover a physical finger over a screen. By the time you touch the text to investigate if it's a link, you've already executed the click and left the page. The design totally ignored the physical reality of the interface.
Designers also rely heavily on the visual rule of proximity, don't they? Like things that are physically close together on a screen are assumed by the brain to belong together logically. Because Western cultures read left to right, we strongly associate an image with the text directly to its right.
Yeah, proximity is a very powerful shortcut. If a designer places a photo, leaves a massive white space gap, and then places the descriptive text, the brain instantly categorizes them as unrelated. It simply won't expend the energy to connect them.
So we have this incredible tuned visual system. It's aggressively filtering 40 million inputs, snapping Lego genes together, monitoring the periphery for threats, and constantly reading affordances for action. But this intense hyper-focus creates massive, highly predictable blind spots.
This raises an important question, actually. What happens when our brain's top-down processing, our concentrated focus, completely overrides the bottom-up processing of raw visual data? This is the core of inattentional blindness.
Right.
It was famously demonstrated by Christopher Shabris and Daniel Simons's gorilla experiment.
Oh, we all know the invisible gorilla video. You watch people passing a basketball, you focus on counting the passes, and a person in a full gorilla suit walks right through the middle of the game, and roughly 50% of people completely fail to see the gorilla.
But the real insight from Shabris and Simons wasn't just that people missed it. The really groundbreaking part was when they ran the experiment using eye tracking software. They proved that the central gaze of the people who missed the gorilla was physically locking onto it. The light from the gorilla was hitting their fovea.
So what does this all mean for modern data analytics? I mean, tech companies spend millions of dollars on heat map eye tracking studies to prove users are looking at their advertisements. But if a person's eyes can literally lock onto a giant gorilla and their brain completely edits it out of their conscious perception just to focus on counting passes, aren't those expensive heat maps effectively useless?
It absolutely invalidates how blindly the industry relies on them. Eye tracking proves where the physical organ was pointed. It does not prove cognitive perception. If a user's top-down goal is reading an article, their brain will actively edit the banner ad out of their consciousness to save processing power, regardless of where their eyes darted.
That's incredible. We also have literal physical limits to our sight that designers frequently ignore, like Chromostereopsis.
Yes, this is a severe visual fatigue caused when two specific colors are placed next to each other, making them appear to exist at different depths. The most aggressive offender is red text on a blue background. The lens of the human eye really struggles to focus on both wavelengths simultaneously. The colors literally appear to vibrate or jump off the screen,
Which causes immediate physical strain. And then, of course, there's the reality of color blindness, which affects about 9% of men.
Right. If a dashboard uses a green button for save and a red button for delete, but the buttons are identical in shape and placement, a red-green colorblind user has no affordance to guide them. This is why the unbreakable rule in accessible design is redundant visual coding. You cannot rely on color alone. You must pair the color with a distinct geon, a shape change, an icon, or differing line thickness.
Though I do love the detail the source includes about the evolutionary advantage of colorblindness. Because they aren't distracted by the complex data of color noise, colorblind individuals are often significantly better at spotting camouflage.
Yeah, their visual system isn't bogged down by the ventral stream's color data, so their brains immediately recognize the structural pattern disruption, the dreams breaking the background noise. It is a brilliant example of how adaptable the brain's processing hierarchy really is.
So to pull all of this together, our visual reality is not a live camera feed. It is a heavily edited, calorie-saving mental model that was optimized for surviving threats on the savannah, not for navigating flat glass screens or confusing door handles.
Exactly. Your brain is performing an exhausting computational miracle every single second, just to give you the actionable gist of the world. So the next time you pull a push door or click the wrong button on a minimalist website, do not blame yourself. You are experiencing a breakdown in design that fundamentally ignored human psychology.
It's the designer's fault for breaking the visual promise. And that brings us to a final thought for you to take away today.
We've explored how deeply susceptible our brains are to simple 2D digital affordances, how a few pixels of a fake drop shadow can trigger a physical urge to click a flat screen.
If our visual processing systems are already this easily manipulated by geometric shapes and basic shadows, how will our brains handle the upcoming flood of fully immersive virtual and augmented reality? If a 2D shadow controls our actions today, what happens to our sense of agency when the entire world we see is a synthetic affordance, custom designed by someone else?
The rules of perception will be entirely rewritten.
Something to mull over next time you stare at a screen. We will catch you on the next deep dive.